Welcome to the Niche Pursuits podcast. Today we are joined by Brad Wayland with Quiet Light Brokerage. Now, we're not talking today about how to do something in the world of website building or content creation. We're not talking about a success story, but we are talking about a conversation that I'm going to guess applies to every single person listening to this podcast. And that's the conversation around building a portfolio of websites, digital assets, side hustles, etc., versus staying focused on a single project. Now, Brad brings 2 decades worth of experience in the online world, not to mention the experience that he has in buying and selling lots and lots of websites, like I think dozens by the time he was all said and done. Not just that, but he's helped over 60 different transactions go through at Quiet Light. So he's seen a lot, and he shares some pretty, I'll say, sobering summations or things he's learned about the success that he's seen. And a lot of that has to do with the idea of staying focused on a singular project instead of going after a portfolio of, again, websites or digital assets. And I try to challenge him and give him all the scenarios and all the reasons for why you might want to consider it. Obviously, we all get excited about new projects, but also diversity, especially in the wake of a lot of different things that have been going on in the world of search and other algorithms this year. But Brad has some really, really great stories and arguments that he presents in the world of focusing on a single project and not getting distracted by multiple projects or shiny objects. I think it's a great conversation that all of us have in our head, and I think now we finally get to have it play out on an episode here of the podcast. Hope you enjoy. Before we jump into the podcast, I wanted to let you know that today's episode is sponsored by Search Intelligence. Here's a short clip of Ferry from Search Intelligence showing you how their agency built digital PR links to a client's website.
This is how we landed massive links for our client in The Sun, a DR90 website, and many other UK news websites. We have used freely available data from YouGov to simply find out what the nation's favorite car brand is and which brands people love the most. Of course, Rolls-Royce came out on top, Aston Martin second, and Jaguar third. We put these insights in a short email and sent it to journalists that write about cars and to national news desks on behalf of our client. Within a few days, our client got featured in all the Suns, as well as many regional newspaper sites in the UK, gaining DR90 links to their leasing comparison website. YouGov website is full of unlimited PR stories with data already available for free. All you have to do is to start researching their data and start asking the data questions. You will be surprised of the unlimited PR campaigns that you will find there that can help you build massive exposure and links to your or your clients' websites. I hope this video is helpful and inspirational.
If you want similar link building PR campaigns for your website, head to search-intelligence.co.uk and get in touch with them now. All right, welcome back to the Niche Pursuits podcast. My name is Jared Bauman, and today we are joined by Brad Wayland with Quiet Light. Brad, welcome on board.
Hey, thanks for having me today, Jared.
It's good to have you here. I feel like we're getting to know some different people over the years, of course, but some different people from Quiet Light. We've had a number of your colleagues on in the past. But to talk about different things, today we're talking about kind of a topic that does come up quite a bit here on the podcast as it relates to owning a portfolio of websites and your experience in that. Why don't you give us some background? Let the Niche Pursuits audience get to know you a little bit more before we dive in.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, I graduated college around 2002. Had a finance degree. Thought about going into financial planning. Ended up getting a corporate accounting job and got some finance chops there, balancing GL accounts and doing sales and use tax for Camping World. Literally thought of that cube as like a jail cell within like about 2 weeks. Like I'd run my own painting business through college. I'd owned several businesses in high school, whether it was selling gum out of my locker or bracelets or whatever. I just was always trying to figure out a way to make a buck, and getting into that corporate America world where my dad had thrived. I thought I'm going to be a businessman. And I figured out very quickly, like, I'm going to get fired from this job. Like, I'm not even going to make it. Like, these people are going to see right through me. And so I started kind of seeing what was going on, and other types of opportunities. And so got a job offer from Edward Jones, thought about going down that path. I was interested in financial planning, retirement planning. And a couple of friends of mine had a custom t-shirt business that was selling t-shirts to groups. And they said, hey, we've got like 10 employees and we need like some business development. Would you want to come on here instead and kind of see what's going on? And they were doing kind of a sort of a local college rep model where you had people on campus trying to sell the shirts for you. And then you're wanting to ship, orders of 50 to 100 shirts. And so I came in and they had been tinkering around with this idea of launching a website for selling group orders of custom t-shirts. And so in 2004, started looking at that. We really had no idea what we were doing. A local firm had built a really rudimentary website for us for doing it. And I couldn't figure out how the traffic actually got there. And I became super enamored with the data behind that. And so I started asking the firm, like, what's going on here? And they're like, well, we're just putting $25 a day into this Google AdWords platform. And I'm like, okay, well, and how do you know if that's the right number? They're like, we don't. And I'm like, okay, well, how do you measure? And they were like, what do you mean? And I was like, there's got to be some way of measuring. Like, do we know anything about these people? And they're like, no. So at the time, actually, Google had not completed their acquisition of Urchin yet. And so we went out and paid for index tools, $200 a month to have analytics, on our website. And then shortly after, Google Analytics actually kind of rolled out and we put that up. But I got really enamored with ranking for free is what I used to call it. So, I was like, hey, I want to know how to rank for free. So I started going to the popular circuit at the time, which was like Search Engine Strategies, New York and stuff like that. And, you didn't have a laptop battery that could even keep up for even 10 minutes, back in those days. So you would write notes with your hands vigorously. And so I went deep down the SEO rabbit hole for many years. And I would love to tell you that I figured it out in like 3 months, but it wasn't very glamorous. I spent from 2004 to 2006 really just failing over and over again, working for some friends, making no money. But in 2006, I finally had enough failure to be like, I know what we need to do. So we rebuilt the tech from the ground up. We built a design studio that at the time was built in Flash that was a very forward-thinking product at the time. We built the site to rank. We put it out there in 2007, and I woke up the next morning to the homepage of Gizmodo saying, Blue Cotton has built Photoshop-like environment for creating custom t-shirts. The website crashed. We got hundreds of links the first day from all the wannabe Gizmodos. And then about a month later, Adobe linked to us from adobe.com, showcasing what we had done with Flash at the time. And that really put us on the map. And we rode that from basically $1 million in sales and 6 employees to 130 employees and operating out of a 110,000 square foot production facility, a decade later. Wow. And so, and during that time, I was really interested in search and I was really interested in e-commerce. But in the custom t-shirt space, you have to really be interested in running a factory. And that was a big challenge for us. So all that time, all I really wanted to do was stuff on the web. But we were always bogged down with trying to get orders out the door. And so, we had this, basically 8-figure business with 130 employees that sometimes felt like 130 headaches. And every shirt had to touch 22 hands before it went out the door. And it was like, there's got to be an easier way to make money than this. Now, that was a profitable business. It's a good business. It's a good business still today. But I started thinking more in terms of, what am I going to do with this skill that I have? I understand search. What can I do with that? Do I have to have the orders touch 22 hands? And actually, I kind of skirted over this, but because all the revenue for the company started going through my department, I was able to do an equity swap, some other e-commerce things that I owned. And so I got some ownership in the company and it ended up being very meaningful for my family. But it still didn't change the fact that my partners were more interested in running that factory B2B, doing fulfillment for people business. And I was mostly interested in just anything internet commerce, whatever that was. And so one day I was actually talking with a friend who had a free vector site on the web that, today is probably close to $100 million company in terms of valuation. And he said, I'm looking at this design blog for $50,000, but I think I'm not going to buy it. And I was like, oh, really? So how's it work? He's like, oh, it's just, just ranked for articles in WordPress. And there's like AdSense and stuff like that on top of it. And I was like, right. So no 22 hands to touch the shirts.
Just runs itself.
And I was like, so I basically would just be doing SEO full time if I owned this said content site. And he was like, well, I guess that's one way of looking at it. And I was like, so you're not going to buy it? And he's like, no, you should buy it. And I was like, okay. So I bought it. I paid 50 grand for it. I made my money back in 10 months. And that started me on the portfolio train. I was really interested in buying. And so I was on the buying side 26 times. And my transactions got much larger. They never got that large. Content, even back when I was buying, in 2012, 2013, 2014, there wasn't a lot of really large content sites. So my largest ones were 500. I had 2 500s. I had 1 650. So they were not huge in terms of the way a lot of people would look at internet transactions. But at the time in content, those were pretty big.
Yeah,
And,
I would agree.
And I exited from that portfolio in 2015 to private equity, actually a firm that was doing programmatic ads, sort of a competitor to like AdThrive and Mediavine called Freestar. And so sold to them, and they actually shut it down within no time and said, hey, we need to focus on running programmatic ads. That's what we're good at. And I started advising at Quiet Light a year and a half later. And I've been at Quiet Light now for 6 years. I'm a managing director of Quiet Light. I've closed 60 deals as an advisor here, and actually I really love the work that we do at Quiet Light day in and day out in terms of advising clients and helping people exit their business.
You have truly been on all the different sides to some degree, SEO is developed. I mean, we talk a lot in the podcast, especially in like the news section, about the development and the way SEO has gone. But I mean, you've been building brands and businesses online for quite a while now. I guess as we get into today's conversation, I feel like you're quite the well-rounded person when it comes to today's topic and this idea of owning web or digital assets and the approach that someone should take. Like, could you just kind of set the stage for us as we get into this conversation, and again, using that background you have to help people understand where we're going in today's conversation?
Yeah, so I, as a general rule, would put myself in a little bit of a naysayer on portfolio building. I actually get calls many times a year from people who say they're running and operating a portfolio, that they want to run and operate a portfolio. Seems to be something that a lot of people see it's an aspiration that people have. I want to own a portfolio. And I will tell you that as I look at portfolio ownership, I think there's some pitfalls with the idea. And so I think that it's not that I'm saying don't do it, but I am a little bit more on the side of you might want to think about some things before you go down that road, or as you consider going down that road, and see if any of these things are true for you. So that's kind of how I would set the stage. I'm probably going to sound a little bit like I'm negative on the idea of a portfolio. I do think that the right person can do it well, or the right organization can do it well. But what I've found in working with entrepreneurs and kind of studying entrepreneurs is that it's hard to find those people. And I will just go ahead and admit that I'm one of those people that I don't think can do it well. It's not my cup of tea. And I've had to just kind of accept that and say like, hey, that's just not what you're best at.
Let me help us all out here to get our mind around it. And I'm going to almost create like a quadrant. And I can't create a quadrant because we're doing a podcast. So I'm going to verbally talk through a quadrant. And I'm going to talk about I actually have a quadrant written down on my sheet here, but that's beside the point. Like, let's look at it from these 4 buckets, really, if we could, and talk about the perks and the pitfalls from a high level, from your experience of each of them. There's the solopreneur, the solo person who owns and operates for the sake of our conversation, one website, and they run that. Then there's the solo person who owns and operates a portfolio of sites, 2 or more. Then there's the person who gets a team together to help them with their one single website. presumably to make it larger and achieve some scale. And then there's the person who puts together a team to help them grow and manage a portfolio of websites. So we've almost got these 4 angles, right? You can kind of do it all by yourself and build one website by yourself, or you can get others to come in and help you with that. Or then you can go the portfolio route, whether you want to do it by yourself. And a lot of people listening will have maybe 3 or 4 sites that they're building kind of side by side. And then there's that portfolio where you bring in a team. And we've kind of interviewed a few of those people where they have large teams. Like maybe just to give people some framework, help people understand like perks, pitfalls of each of them. And maybe if there's any buckets I missed that you've seen.
Yeah, no, I like the way that you've kind of broken that down. So, let's start with the solopreneur. It sounds pretty obvious, but in life, there's never enough hours in the day. So I would just kind of make the observation that like, if you own one site and it's going well, and that's what you do, you don't have a divided interest when it comes to your work. Everything that you think about, I call it the anvil on the chest. If you're like me at all, like I wake up every morning with an anvil on my chest, and that is like all the things that I need to do. And so, I started having that anvil pretty heavily in my 20s, and here I am. I'm actually kind of an old man of the web now. I'm 44 years old, and so a lot of times when I meet people, they're younger than me now, and I still have it. And I'm at the point now where I'm actually thinking about the end of my career and thinking about, well, how do I kind of want to sunset? And so I would say that like that anvil on the chest, as I've kind of seen it, is something that is kind of based on time. You don't have tons of time in every day. Every day you kind of find yourself running into a shortage of time if you have a life like me. Now, I've signed up for some things in my life that might make my life more hectic than other people. I've got 5 kids, we homeschool, which that probably sounds like, oh, well, then you got all this flexibility. But I mean, I have humans running around this property all the time, needing things, doing things. And so I look at it a little bit differently as like, those are responsibilities that I haven't given to someone else to take care of. I'm part of the education, although my wife handles 99% of it. That 1% does require something. So when you think about the solopreneur and the focus, I just think that like on the surface, the idea of being able to focus on one thing and grind on one thing is a powerful thing. And what I've found on the web is that those that are able to focus on one thing and get up every day and grind and live that life end up having an inordinate amount of success. And the thing is, like you said, I've kind of been on a lot of sides of the transaction. So I've been a seller, I've been a buyer, I've brokered 60 deals. And I've had a lot of operating experience. And there's a really interesting thread between my most successful clients that I've had at Quiet Light. 100% of them were focused solely on one thing, running one thing. They had the same kind of schedule. These are guys that when you're operating at the level where you're going to go sell something for $25 million, you are getting up, you are grinding on that thing for 15 years. In my experience, that's what I saw from working with clients that had those kinds of exits. They do it for 15 years. They get up every day with that sense of purpose. They don't spend all their time vacationing. They don't spend all their time, posting what they're doing that's so fun to Instagram. They're working a lot. They don't have as many of those posts because they've got a big business that they have to have, and they're kind of a solopreneur. A lot of them don't even have, especially in the internet space, you see that they don't have well-developed out teams. There's a lot put on that sort of CEO candidate. And so I've seen those people just over time, that grind of just going after it, not giving up, and like I'm trying to test new things every day, every week, every month, every year. They end up having an inordinate amount of success, and that kind of leads to big numbers in terms of what their seller discretionary earnings are, what their revenues are, and ultimately what their exit looks like when they go to sell their business. Or we're not at Quiet Light, we're not like trying to pressure anybody to sell their business. Like if you enjoy the business, you should keep the business. If you like working in it and you feel like your growth prospects are good, keep it, run it, use it as a cash cow for yourself or your family. So I would say like on that first quadrant, that's the most straightforward of all the 4 quadrants that you painted. That one first quadrant is hard to beat because it's so simple. Now, I will tell you, it's easy to say that, but a lot of people listen to your podcast are entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs love to chase butterflies.
Shiny object syndrome.
Shiny objects.
We have
That's
a
right.
whole section on the weekly podcast Spencer and I do dedicated to it because it's hard to ignore. So you got to at least address the elephant in the room, right?
It is, and I will tell you, so when I bought the design blog for only 50 grand, put 50 grand in, but made my money back in 10 months, the finance guy in me was like sounding all the alarms. He's like, look what you've done. You can create for yourself 100% returns in 10 months. What's the S&P 500 done? That's what I was saying to myself, you know. I think I probably woke up on those days and thought, I wonder if I'm the smartest man that's ever lived. Because look how I did all these things. What I didn't know at the time was, right. But what I didn't know is that I was benefiting from the way that Google was operating. I was actually, before Panda and Penguin rolled out, which if you're listening to this and you don't know what Panda and Penguin are, that's because you're not a dinosaur like me. But, you know, those were early algorithm changes that affected links and affected the amount of content. You know, Google's processing like literally like 1 trillion times more content today than they were having to deal with back then, but they were having trouble dealing with it back then, so they built these algorithms that fought against it. And so I rode the wave up for a long time while they were trying to figure it out. And a lot of times those updates they were doing were dialing my traffic up. So I was thinking, man, I must be so good. I must be so good at this SEO thing. I must be so good at building the content. And so, but when you talk about shiny objects, when I said I was a buyer 26 times, that's supposed to be a resume builder. But I will tell you, that was my biggest pitfall. I was addicted to buying. I like to buy, and I would think about the 1 or 2 things that I knew I could change immediately and make a difference in the business. But I wasn't thinking about the grind of like, but what about after that? What about after you do that? And now the content's sitting out there, and you don't have the strategic plan to make it the most up-to-date, the best content library Google's ever seen for this topic. And I didn't make those plans. And so I was actually playing with fire. And, you know, as you know, like if you sit on that stuff for long enough, Google's going to start monkeying around with it. I don't know if you want me to, if you're like, Brad, you just spent 10 minutes on quadrant 1. Like, are we going to run out of time before you even get to quadrant 3? I don't have to spend as long as the others, but I want to say like quadrant 1 is a very straightforward thing to me. So I'm happy to break into some of those others, but I wanted to just kind of point that out and let you speak.
What's the biggest downfall to someone breaking out from one project, from one site into bigger projects? Because we've heard it, we've all heard it. Everyone here has heard like, don't, you know, stay focused, like stay focused on one project and don't spread yourself too thin. The lure, though, of having, and I think there's a lure also to diversifying, especially in this day and age. A lot of people listening are relying on Google traffic for the primary traffic medium. And, you know, there's a lot less rhyme or reason to what's going on. And so having multiple websites or projects can kind of help mitigate risk. So these are kind of the things people are going to be thinking. What's the biggest risk out of all, though, of going after more than one project in your experience?
Yeah, I think the biggest risk is that, especially with content, because let me just say that it's not just me. I'm not the only person that was addicted to buying. Do you guys talk at all about Amazon aggregators on the pod? Have you spent much time on them?
A little bit last year and the year before, yeah.
Yeah, just as a super brief, you know, overview of that, we had these buyers come to the table that had raised a bunch of money to buy Amazon businesses because the idea was, hey, these are all run the same. So we've got great economies of scale. We could hire a small team to run lots of revenue. That was the whole premise. And so they came on the scene and said, we're the best. All of them said the same thing to us. We're the best. We've raised 100 million. We've raised 200 million. We're the best buyers. Nobody has the team that we have. I heard it from dozens of them. They go close deals. Where are we at today with that? Well, there probably are some that will make it. But here's where we really are. All the biggest ones are pretty much gone. And some of them have filed for bankruptcy. Benetago filed for bankruptcy. Thrasio is looking to reorganize, which sounds like they're filing for bankruptcy. And so when you look at that situation, it's like, okay, wait a second. These people told us they were the best. They bought 100 businesses. And what we learned is they were addicted to buying just like Brad. They didn't want to operate the difficult pieces of it. And then we had sellers that came to us and said, hey, they let my product stock out. I'm not going to meet my earnout. They didn't buy the inventory. They didn't follow or do the most basic things. So that's the biggest pitfall, is that you fall asleep on things. When you start to add things, there is a cost, and it takes a special person to be able to manage. How can you operate at a high level? Like when I think of a portfolio operator that's operating at a high level, I think of like Elon Musk. Like when you look at Elon, you're like, okay, how's he doing with Tesla? Well, if you look at the stock price today, you'd be like, well, I guess he's not doing very good. But that's not the reality. The reality is he's completely rethought the way cars work. There's no dealerships. We don't have land all over the country holding multi-million dollars worth of vehicles as storage on the most expensive real estate in the world. Instead, you order it from your phone. You charge it from your home. It's faster. It accelerates. I'm not trying to do an advertisement for Tesla here. I'm saying Tesla's a very impressive company. And if you drive a Tesla, I have a feeling you probably won't want to go back to a combustion engine because it's a better product. Okay? But it's not just that. Elon's taken satellites to space with Starlink. He's transporting our astronauts for the government when they need to go to space. And it's like, oh, so he's operating at a high level over there. He was co-founder of OpenAI. You see a guy that's like, oh, this is a guy that, now I will give one thing that I'll say, like, this is an advantage Elon has that Brad doesn't have. I can't attract the talent that he can attract. But I still think it's impressive that he can build a portfolio. But I think that we need to be thinking about these portfolio operators more in the vein of like, you got to be a special person than we do. Instead, we think it's just like, oh, it's just a list of things. You just do these things and everything's fine. I'll just take care of my content. But I would say this, and I don't know that everybody's necessarily a content operator, but I did a lot in content, so that's why I talk about it a lot. The standards for what is I'm doing all the things I need to do is generally a list of things I heard on niche pursuits or other trends that I'm hearing in the industry that everybody is doing. I don't think that's the way to win long term. I think that's a way to get you into the above average category. But if you want to be the best, you have to be thinking about, well, what can I do beyond that? What can I do that's creative that no one's doing with my content or with my product that's like, I'm actually trying to do something that it's not just something I saw from my mastermind or from my podcast. It's things that I'm so into my industry that I kind of found it. So one of the big pitfalls, that I would say is like, we think that if we follow this list of things that we're up to date, and then when an update comes out like Helpful Content 2 or the core algorithm changes. We've had a lot of disruptions in search in the last few weeks, in the last few months. And we have people that would be considered very good content operators telling us they're getting dialed down pretty heavily. Mm-hmm. And so I think that it's one of those things where I'm like, and I've had people tell me on the phone, I'm doing all the things I'm supposed to do. And I'm thinking, well, you're doing all the things that you think all the best people are doing. But is that all the things that you need to be doing? Or is it because you have these 4 other things going on that you're not able to dedicate the time and energy to rethinking what you're doing and do it well? I feel like that's the biggest pitfall. One pitfall for me that I don't know if anyone else relates to is I would buy things that I wasn't passionate about.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So I would think
you'd see the financial gain or potential of it over the interest or passion of it.
Yeah, and that's a tough one because I think that, like the friend I mentioned that's in the graphic vector space, in his situation, he was a graphic designer by trade. He's passionate about design. He's passionate about the tools designers need, and that has fueled him for 15 years to build an unbelievable business. And I think that when I looked at myself owning a portfolio of web design blogs, I was like, well, I don't really care about web design. I care about search and I care about making money. That was like the things I would think in my mind. I was like, I like search. I'm really interested in search. I'm interested in making a buck. But I didn't care about web design. Well, does that affect what my content looks like in web design? It absolutely does. I can't tell you whether this jQuery tutorial is good or bad because I don't use jQuery. I can't tell you whatever the example is. I can't tell you a lot of these things because I'm not an expert on the topic. And so I think that it's at least worth considering when you're going to get into a topic. Like, do I think it's important for me to become or be an expert on this topic? I think that's another pitfall.
Hey, just a quick break. I hope you're enjoying the podcast so far. Just a quick reminder that today's episode is sponsored by Search Intelligence. Now, I've got a short clip from Ferry with Search Intelligence showing you how their agency built digital PR links to a client's website.
This campaign got us big links in websites such as Lifehacker, Wales Online, Daily Record, and about 20 other news websites. Let me show you how we've done it. We knew that people will be flying a lot this summer, and we knew that journalists will be writing about this topic a lot. So, on behalf of our client, we put together a nice guide about how to fall asleep on the plane. Then we use MuckRack to find journalists who write about travel. Then we put our advice in a nice email and send the tips to the journalists. Within just a few days, the links started landing, securing our client natural placements in really big websites, just like this, and this. This is a great example about how you can leverage seasonal trends to earn links to a website. Anticipate what journalists want to write about at all times and give them the stories that they need. They will reward you with some great, juicy links. I hope this is helpful.
Like what you just heard and are looking for similar link building PR campaigns for your website? Just go to search-intelligence.co.uk and get in touch with them today. So you made mention of something earlier on, 10 minutes ago maybe. I want to circle back on it. I was recently a guest on a podcast, and at the end of the podcast, they were like, "Oh, you're the host of the Niche Pursuits podcast. What's that like?" We were kind of talking about it, and they said, "What's the biggest insight that you've learned from your time hosting for several years?" And I thought, boy, I haven't gotten that question before, and I wish I would have had more time to think about this. But the first thing that came to mind that I shared, and I it's funny because months later, I'm like, yeah, that is the most valuable insight I've taken, is I get to interview people every week that are successful. And by and large, almost every single one of them, to a T, I've been doing this almost 3 years, is focused on one project. And you basically said the same thing just now about all the people whose businesses you've helped sell on Quiet Light. Man, go into that, because that was a bit shocking when they heard me say that on their podcast as a guest. And I'm sure a lot of people listening right now to you saying that feel a little agitated, and maybe give us some more insight into that.
Yeah, it's definitely a trend, and it won't reduce the number of people who call me and say, "Hey, I've got this portfolio and I need to get rid of these assets in it," or "Hey, I'm interested in buying a portfolio." It's a very prominent topic. Building a portfolio, buying a portfolio, owning a portfolio. They think it looks glamorous. And to your point about diversification, just as a side tangent, you want to diversify, go diversify in real estate, or go diversify in the S&P 500 or whatever your flavor is of stock market, options. But if you're in the web, you're riding a pretty risky train. Don't let yourself fall into the pitfall of thinking that because I got one that's about peanut butter and jelly and I got another that's about gardening, I'm diversified. You're not. You are solely riding Google or however you're getting your traffic. You're riding a wave of a gigantic third-party platform. But no, I think that what you said, it's really interesting to me that you said that, because now I think you're really smart, Jared, because I feel like I don't find very many people that agree with me on this topic.
I'm more impressed that I just thought of something on the fly, to be honest with you.
But no, I do think it's just part of the trap. I mean, it's like people kind of do the opposite of what they should do in most instances. I'm interested in cryptocurrency. When do people want to talk about buying cryptocurrency? Do they want to talk about buying cryptocurrency when Bitcoin's down to $15,000 and Sam Bankman-Fried is going on trial, and we're finding out that Celsius is bankrupt, and we're finding out, is that when people want to buy Bitcoin? Are they like, "Oh man, Bitcoin's low, I want to buy"? Is that when they want to do it? You want to know when my friends that don't care one bit about cryptocurrency want to buy cryptocurrency?
When it's up.
When Bitcoin's at 69,000 a coin. That's when they're like, I think I'm ready to move in and buy some Bitcoin. People tend to do the opposite in terms of their investing of their time and their capital of what they should do. And so if building a portfolio is something that's really interesting and enamoring, then maybe the idea of doing something simple and grinding. When I say grinding for a reason, I think grinding has a negative connotation. Sometimes people are like, I'm grinding, and they send the positive emoji or a little, GIF to you or whatever it is, and they kind of do it in that way. But when I think of grinding, I think that's a term that entrepreneurs don't want to hear. When I say get up and grind every day, I think they think, no, Brad, no, I'm not looking to grind, man. I'm looking to have a portfolio. We want to have a wide variety of assets, and we want to have cash flows coming from. We're going to be diversified and all these things. And I think, yeah, but is that a real thing for you? Is that something that you're going to be able to achieve? And how are you going to achieve it? And how are you going to do it differently than just kind of following the status quo? Because I would argue that you probably can't even keep up with the status quo once you get very many assets. Even the large organizations. I've got listings right now at Quiet Light that are holding companies that are performing very well. So more like a holdco, not an aggregator, but a holdco. And they're bringing me assets and saying, hey, we don't pay attention to these. Let's get rid of them. That's part of our materials on this one particular listing. It's, hey, we got these 2 brands. We bought them. They're just too small. They're too small for us to fiddle with. We never spent any time on them. And it's not meaningful to us. The other thing I would say too, and I still kind of fall into this trap. A couple of years ago, a friend of mine and I bought a domain name portfolio. Huge mistake. So, it wasn't like the biggest purchase ever. It's like a $600,000 purchase. And we split it, and it is like first name, last name domains, mostly. Prominent ones. Like more common than your name. First name. I was
going to say, you don't have my name, so they can't be that prominent.
but we don't have like Jared. We don't have like Jared Smith, in there. And, I'm not trying to say that either. And what was interesting about it is it's like 2 guys that had operated, 2 guys that had spent a lot of time on the web, and they're like, oh, here's this investment, and hey, it makes about $50,000 a year. You pay $600,000, for it, so you're getting like this annuity of basically 8-9% a year, and you still are going to own this underlying asset because you're only selling off a handful of domain names every year. Like, this is for the rest of your life. And we literally got like 2 months into it, and we were like, why in the world did we buy this thing? Like, we can't do anything to increase the number of sales for bradwayland.com type domain names. Like, we can't really do it. All we can do is just basically sit here and sell when people come to us. And so it just gives us another thing that we have to fiddle with. Yep. And we have to just, and so I think that becomes the problem. Like, I still get roped in. I still do the shiny objects. I'm trying not to. I'm trying super hard. In the last 2 years, I'm trying so hard. Like, I wake up every morning, I'm like, Brad, you know what you are? You are a sell-side advisor. That's what you're going to do today, Brad.
It's like your affirmations in the morning.
Yeah, you're going to go in there and you're going to help some people sell their business. That's what you're going to do. And you're not going to go look for something to buy. It's therapy for me. And because I have found that, like, it's not just the chasing butterflies, it's also the size. The size of the deal starts to impact your thinking too. So when you get to a point where you're in your career where you feel like you have some flexibility with what you can buy. Like, you can buy like a little bit larger size than you used to be able to, all that kind of thing. It's very easy to do the chasing butterflies on the small scale. Like, I used to own this domain, militarybases.com. I bought it from Flippa back in 2012 on, in like literally in 10 minutes. I saw it on there. 2011. I saw militarybases.com on there. It's for $125,000. I hit the message the guy. He had a buy it now of $150. I offered him $125. He said, why don't you go up to $150? I was like, no, I don't want to pay $1. I'll pay you $125 tomorrow if you can show me AdSense access, Google Analytics access. I'll wire you the money directly. Transfer the hosting to me. We'll do a 1-day deal. He says, deal. I buy it. I sell it for $250,000 about 2 years later. The guys that I bought it from operated it for many years, and I was like, I think I missed that site. And I emailed them. You guys have any interest in selling this? No, we don't. It actually, the traffic dropped after you sold it to us, and it's taken us a lot of years to get our money back. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. So then I come back and say, well, let me know if you ever want to sell it. And then they came to me and said, you want to buy it? So, bought it with a buddy of mine. Just was like, hey, you want to split this thing with me? Never did one thing on it. A guy randomly came through and contacted us. It actually had gone up on traffic because Google had been friendly to it. So the earnings were up. And so we made money on it, but we couldn't get ourselves out of bed to do anything to it. And so like when you talk about, what do you do as an individual and how do you manage this? I think that the other thing too is when you're wanting to build a portfolio, you're like, whatever, if you got $1 million to spend or if you got $100,000 to spend, if you want the portfolio, you don't want to go spend all of it on the one thing. So you go buy like with a portion, you buy something and you're like, I'm going to divide. I think it would be way better to say, I'm spending $1 million or I'm spending 100 and you go all in and spend that amount. And then you get up every day and you work and grind on that asset and see what you can make of it.
Let's talk to the person. I mean, you probably haven't talked everyone out of being a portfolio owner.
No, I try. I actually try not to talk anyone out of it unless they ask me.
Well, we kind of asked you at least to come on and we'll say play devil's advocate, right? Because a lot of people, we've had people on that are building portfolios that have measured approaches to that, and some that have a financing approach to that. But we like to kind of bring all sides of the conversation, and so following that vein, like. For someone whose ears are perked up, perhaps they have one too many projects, or maybe more, but one too many. I think that we've talked about it a couple of times. Like there's this desire to have a shiny object, or as entrepreneurs and as creators, we do get excited by possibilities elsewhere, and that oftentimes is the reason why when we get out of bed in the morning, we're not as focused, like you described. Do you have any tips, whether from your own experience, because it sounds like you're really going through it right now, or just from what you've seen be successful for people, like tips to scratch that itch without starting new projects, tips to feed that side of all of us without derailing our focus and our efforts to grow a single project?
I think for me, what has helped me is that I've realized that the results are not better by going out and getting more. I have this perception in my mind that the results will be better. When I've reflected on my portfolio, which was all web design sites, I've thought many times about how that first site cost 50 grand. And then I went on to spend more and more money, and that became more and more risk for me as I went on. But I've many times reflected and thought, instead of buying all those brands, if I had just taken that one $50,000 investment and just poured all the energy and stuff that I put into all those other 25 and just kept going after it. And I think about all the things I did. I launched marketplaces that had memberships. I launched different types of affiliate partnerships. I launched training programs for how to learn different types of web design and development. Did all these different things in that portfolio. And I think, if I instead had just launched all those things on this one domain that I had bought, I think I would have had the same revenues or greater. I would have built a bigger brand. I would have had the same revenues or greater at a fraction of the cost, at a fraction of the stress, and my exit would have probably been much more glamorous when I went to sell it. So when I look at it, I think that like, part of that conscious, Brad gets up every morning and says to himself, today you're going to go advise clients because that's what you're doing. That is a positive message in my head because I think I've come to the realization, like I wish I was like the guy that just could like see the angles without experiencing it. But in my operating career, that's not been me. I've been pretty good at finding things that can make money. I've been pretty good at not getting myself burned. In terms of like buying something so stupid that you just lose all your money overnight kind of thing. But I have not been good at not having to learn the mistakes. Like most of my advice comes from experience. When a seller comes to me and says, hey, we got this platform, it's been ranking for 15 years, it's legacy, but we're building it all over in a new tech. And I'm like, do you rely on search? Do you rely on this? Do you rely on that? Yes. this is a very risky move. Like, you don't know what you don't know. Can it be done? Sure, it can be done. It takes a special person to migrate and do a find and replace for all your tech stack that has brought you all your business. Like, don't go into this thinking it's better because it's new, because that old tech stack might have some value. Now, there might be people that listen to this. I mean, look, if Syed Balki listens to this, he'll be like, Brad's clueless. I've got awesome motive. Look at what I've built. I've built an empire. And I'll be like, you know what? I said for your average person or for your regular listener, this is not going to work. There are special people. It takes a special person. Syed's a special person. He's a guy that's proven that he can do it over and over again from everything I've seen. You know, he's built so many things. He's acquired, he's partnered, he's done all sorts of things, and he's got this track record that kind of proves it. And so, you know, I really feel like the evidence is kind of in the sort of the 99% rule here of just like, look, if you just want to just zoom out, just think about it. You know, I mean, if you woke up tomorrow and your only goal was, I'm going to be the fittest person I can be, and so I'm going to spend 8 hours a day working on my fitness. And then you said to yourself, I'm going to wake up and I'm going to work on fitness, but I'm also going to work on reading books. And I want to try to read a book a day. And then you wake up and you say, I want to do the fitness and I want to do the book a day and I want to learn how to code. Like, it's very easy for us to see, well, Brad, very quickly, you're not going to be able to do all these.
Yeah.
You need time to be as fit as you can be. If you want to learn how to be a programmer, you're going to have to do a lot of trial and error. You're 44 years old. It's going to take a lot. You don't know anything about programming. But you want to read a book a day, you're going to need several hours for that. But when it comes to business, it's like, oh, no. If you're a good leader, you can just put the team in place and you'll be good to go. Well, maybe. But what happens when that Google Helpful Content 2 comes out and you see 40% drops across a third of your portfolio? What do we do then? Do you have the team in place to sound the alarms and go try to figure out how you're going to navigate it and fix all those problems? I think that's where it becomes a challenge. It's like when everything's going perfect. When I was riding high, when I was buying and they had not rolled out a lot of their iterations on Panda and Penguin, all I was seeing was everything I do goes up and makes me more money, so I must be the most brilliant creator. And I got to be humbled in the most glamorous way when they started kind of tinkering with the traffic, and I realized, like, whoa, now I've got 26 problems and I've got to figure out how to navigate it. And I was very fortunate for the way that kind of turned out for me, because my revenue stayed steady even against my traffic going down for a long period of time, which allowed me to navigate it and figure out this may not be the best business for me, and eventually to actually sell and divest out.
As we kind of start to wrap up, let me ask you this. What sort of analysis can someone do to determine if they are, you know, kind of that unique Elon Musk of the analogy you gave? Like, because like you said, there's probably a collection of people, a handful of people listening, just due to the sheer numbers of the people that listen, that might have the nous to run a portfolio, you know, like, but you don't want to get so far in before you realize whether you do or don't. And maybe that is the only way, but are there any other things you've seen from the handful of people that you found that could be successful at it, that maybe some questions that people could ask or some things they could look at about themselves to see if they might be that type?
I think if it's reliant on one person, it's going to be pretty difficult to convince me that you can do this successfully and just continue to add properties. There literally is only so many hours in the day to work on things. Like, you can't work hard enough to manage something when it gets big enough, when it gets large enough. I think if you find that you are particularly good at attracting talented people to work with you, people like to work with you, people are drawn to you, you feel like you have people that are smarter than you on the team, that's a big factor for seeing that kind of growth. I think that your best entrepreneurs are generally, in terms of scaling, are generally ones that say, I hire people that are better than me at different things to come in and do things. So if you find yourself in a spot, I mean, even if you can find one person that you think they're loyal to you, that you can afford to compensate, that you think does it better than you can and can understand your vision and your goals, and they don't have any desire to betray you or to move on from you and things like that. Like, even one person that can do those things probably gives you the ability to take on more than one thing. But I do think that a lot of entrepreneurs don't love the nitty gritty of that kind of work. A lot of us don't love to sit down and have the meetings. When I was in more of what I would call my corporate career, my custom t-shirt business was not really a corporate career, but it was the most corporate I ever really got to outside of the short stint at Camping World. When I was in that career, I was known for not liking to meet because it was exhausting to me. I would walk into a meeting with a bad attitude in my head of like, why are we here? What is the point of this? We've got 10 people here. I'm running numbers on how much we're paying for the meeting. I would sit there and think like, well, we just spent 20 minutes talking about the last holiday party and there's 10 people in here. So that was an expensive conversation. Like I have an analytical mind. Like that's where I would go to. And so I think that you've got to be a person that is going to be honest with yourself about, if you want a portfolio, do you want the things that are really necessary to operate at the highest level? Because I don't think operating at the highest level is just doing what the best guests that come on niche pursuits are doing. Even though I'm very impressed with the people you bring on and the things that they're doing, I don't think that that is the standard for, what is good. What is good has got to go beyond just what other people are doing. Like, we don't have to reinvent the wheel, but we do need to go in and be able to think outside the box about ways to maybe improve the business that not everyone's talking about and be able to test those ideas.
It's just interesting, the timing. A lot of people that I've talked to about the Helpful Content Update have said, hey, I just think now it's going to take more time for me to make my website the best it can possibly be, right? Like, I just need to be doing more things, whether that's also building social media channel accounts and building social media followings, whether it's building products to sell so that the website has more of a brand aspect to it. And in many ways, these are all things we should have been doing anyways, right? Going back to your point of, imagine if you just kept that first $50,000 purchase and just done all the things to it now. So perhaps in many ways, and again, the Helpful Content Update was decimating, so I'm not trying to say this as a silver lining, but perhaps in many ways, a lot of what you're talking about is a lot of what we are learning the hard way, for some of us at least, through that Helpful Content Update.
I think it definitely is. And like, look, I've talked to a lot of people, and I'm not trying to get into like our theories on what's going on in SEO, but I've had so many people try to look at, let's just talk about AI, okay? People try to look at AI in its own bucket over here. Like, if you talk to people in the food content space, a lot of them will be like, well, AI is not affecting us. And is that because AI doesn't create pictures of the recipes and it can't do a flavor profile of what's going to taste good to it? I don't know exactly what the reason is there, but I think to myself, well, actually, let's just say Google is being fed 1 billion pages a day before this AI, these libraries of content started being used to create content. And after they launch it, they're being fed 4 billion a day. Well, we're all in competition. No one's immune. I've said to people about helpful content, I've said, hey, I think this could be related to the amount of content coming from AI. And people have said to me, oh, you must not understand helpful content. I'm like, well, no, but I understand economics. In economics, there's an economy there in Google. If Google's used to seeing 1 billion pages a day, and we start feeding it 4 billion pages a day, then there is not enough room for all 4 billion of those pages to rank where people would expect them to rank. Mm-hmm. And there's going to be collateral damage, because a lot of times, here's how I like to describe the updates. Google does this. They turn the dial, and then they look, and they're like, let's see what happened here. And sometimes, if you own sites, if you've been affected by updates, I bet you've seen an update before where you went down, and then some time passed, and there was a moment where it just went back up, and you never changed anything. And it's clear that they had a volume dial on your traffic. They weren't thinking about you. They were thinking about something completely different, and they turned that dial. And then they looked at the data, and then they came back and said, don't know if that results is good. And they turned it back some of the way. And you started to see a different change, even though you made no changes. And so, I do think that, the timing, this has been one of the most dramatic years for Google updates that I remember in a while. And so it is painful to kind of go through that. And I don't think it's always as simple as saying, hey, if you just had one website, you wouldn't have you wouldn't have suffered that fate. Because I think we all have to remember that if you live in a world where you're reliant on a third party for your livelihood, then you have to know that you're reliant on that third party. Mm-hmm. Which means that they might make decisions that are in their best interest, and their best interest may not be your best interest. Mm-hmm. And that is where we are on the internet. If you operate on Amazon, you're operating in a world where Amazon operates in their best interest. If you're in content, you're operating in a world where Google operates in their best interest. If you're on Facebook running ads, you're in a world where Meta operates in their best interest. It is very difficult on the web to find yourself in a spot where you're not tied to gigantic parties that have different goals than you do. And so that's where the volatility is. That's why we all live very far down the risk curve. We're out there. I don't know if we're at like the, degenerate gambler, level, but we're somewhere down the curve.
Well, I think a lot of people might say that it's felt a lot like gambling over the past couple months, given all the ups and downs from the various Google updates. I think that might be an apropos statement.
Yeah. One other thing I would say, Jared.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
One other thing I would say is it's just interesting because I've had sellers even that don't have that, they grind and they go to the $25 million sale. I've had people that I've worked with where I just see an intentionality to what they do that would be impossible for them to do that across multiple entities, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. I've got a seller right now that's 68 years old and he's looking to retire, and I've just been so impressed with him because he got the COVID bump. So we call the COVID bump this. Goes up, comes down. It's a bump. We're dealing with a lot of COVID bump businesses right now. But his went like this. It bumped, and then it went. And I was like, hey, what's going on there? And he's like, well, I noticed that there was this COVID increase going on, and I thought, this COVID thing's not going to be around for very long. We got to start making investments right now so that we can keep this going. We don't want to go down once we go up. And so listening to what he had done, he invested in Klaviyo and doing a very good implementation with Klaviyo and getting that set up, and spent a lot of money getting it. And now he's got these emails that get fantastic results every week. He launched his own private label brand when he was selling other people's brands. He launched his own private label brand where he's focusing on all the things that his customers have said are the most valuable to them over the years. He has gone in and made multiple improvements to like speed and all these different things. He had like 7 or 8 things that he did, investments that he made, and every single one of them has benefited the business. And I'm just like, look at that intentionality. Like, you can see why I get into the spot where I'm like, for most of us, it's probably better to just work on one thing and work really hard, because that's, kind of the way it is. And, I read a book many, many years ago by Benjamin Graham called The Intelligent Investor. And, he says in there, way before indexing, I know everybody now, like, owning Fidelity or owning Vanguard, like, everybody thinks like, oh yeah, and people own index funds. Index funds rule the day. 20 years ago, there was a big debate about whether passive management or active management was the best way to go with investing. Benjamin Graham, close to 100 years ago, said, if you are an average investor, it probably will be best for you to just hold the entire market. You'll get the best returns if you just try to hold the whole market and don't try to get into the business of trading. And I think one thing to ask ourselves, am I average? Am I above average? Where am I at on this scale? If you're getting into the internet world and you think, if I'm really honest with myself, I'm maybe a little bit above average. If I'm above average, I probably need to be careful about how risky I get with how many investments I take on and how many things I focus on at once.
Well, it's a good way to bring us to a close here. I mean, and again, just for everyone listening, like, Yeah, it's a debate not to be taken lightly, right? It's pretty easy to just kind of quickly lean into a squirrel, what do they call it, squirrel moments, right? Like a squirrel, a side hustle that you then kind of turn into four, and not that that's bad, but I think this, the greater purpose of this whole conversation is to try to find a way to maximize your efforts and what you're doing from a time and an ROI standpoint. So, Brad, where can people follow along with what you're doing and catch up? I mean, you're with Quiet Light, so I mean, I'm sure they can catch up with you there. But where's the best place to direct people?
Yeah, Brad at quietlight.com. I'm Brad Wayland on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn. So happy to talk. At Quiet Light, we do give free advice. So, if you ever want a valuation for your business, if you ever have a friend that's looking to sell, we do pay referral fees. So certainly you're welcome to reach out, Brad at quietlight.com, and ask me any questions or anything. I'd be happy to give you my advice, and it's free. So, you can take it for what it's worth.
I just used that. I just said that the other day in the podcast. It's fair enough, hey, these things. Thanks for joining us, Brad. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I've struggled with a lot of the things we've talked about. I feel like a lot of people listening will have are in the middle of this somewhere, and certainly can lean into a lot of the feelings that we talked through. So I appreciate you coming on and sharing your decades-long experience with all of this.
Thanks a lot for the invitation. I really appreciate it.
Today's episode is sponsored by Search Intelligence. Here's a short clip of Ferry from Search Intelligence showing you how their agency built digital PR links to a client's website.
We got 20 links and placements on massive websites such as The Express, Mirror, Daily Record, and many more, with a campaign about the pros and cons of popular diets. How about? This is exactly how we've done it. Our client is a very popular fitness client. We have asked them to provide thorough expert commentary about the pros and cons of the most popular diets. Once we have this information, we put this in a nice email and send it out to 15,000, yes, 15,000 journalists from around the world that write about fitness. So good. And unhealthy. Big publications picked up our story from the email, giving our client massive, juicy, saucy, healthy links that are 100% relevant to their website and that will keep the rankings of the website in a great shape. You see what I've done there? I hope this case study inspires and that you will start leveraging expert commentary type campaigns to land links to your or your client's website, just like we've done it with this campaign.
Thanks for joining us today on the podcast. Just a final reminder that it was brought to you by Search Intelligence. And if you're looking for link building PR campaigns for your website, just head over to search-intelligence.co.uk and get in touch with them today. Cheers.